The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Denver corporate lobby as the coffee cup slipped from Jessica Chen's trembling hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On the security monitor, she watched a homeless woman being gently escorted away from the building entrance by a maintenance worker. But Jessica wasn't seeing a stranger. She was seeing the face that had haunted her dreams for 15 years. The face of her little sister, Amy, who had vanished from the foster care system when Jessica was barely 18 herself. Now, as one of the youngest tech CEOs in Colorado, Jessica had everything except the one person who mattered most. What she didn't know was that the kind maintenance worker helping her sister was about to change all their lives forever. Marky Rodriguez had learned long ago that life rarely went according to plan. Standing in the employee break room of Chen Technologies at 5 in the morning, adjusting his maintenance uniform while his 7-year-old son Tyler finished his breakfast cereal at the small table nearby, he reflected on how different his world looked now compared to 3 years ago. Back then, he'd been a project manager at a construction firm, married, living in a suburban house with a white picket fence. Now he was a single father, working 2 jobs, living in a modest apartment, and bringing Tyler to work during school breaks because childcare was a luxury he couldn't afford. Tyler looked up from his bowl, milk dripping from his chin. "Dad, why do we have to come here so early?" His voice carried that sleepy confusion that only young children manage to make sound both annoying and endearing at the same time. Marky ruffled his son's dark hair, so similar to his own. "Because this is when the building is quiet, buddy. We can get our work done, and you can do your coloring books without anyone bothering us. Plus, Mrs. Patterson said you could help me today, remember?" The truth was more complicated, but Tyler didn't need to know about overdue rent notices or the second job Marky worked in the evenings as a security guard at the community center. He'd been the maintenance supervisor at Chen Technologies for 8 months now, and the early hours suited him fine. The building was peaceful before the corporate executives arrived with their expensive suits and complicated problems. Marky preferred fixing things that could actually be repaired with the right tools and enough patience. Tyler nodded solemnly, taking his responsibility as helper very seriously. "Can we check on the lady today?" he asked, referring to someone he'd noticed during their morning routines. For the past 2 weeks, a woman had been sleeping in the small alcove beside the building's main entrance. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen better months. Marky had first spotted her when he arrived for his shift, curled up against the brick wall with nothing but a thin blanket and a backpack that looked like it contained everything she owned. While most people walked past her without a second glance, something about her reminded Marky of his younger sister, who had struggled with addiction before getting clean and moving to Phoenix. The woman never caused trouble, never left trash, never asked anyone for money. She just existed in that small space, trying to stay invisible while finding shelter from Denver's unpredictable spring weather. Marky had started leaving bottled water and granola bars in a discreet spot nearby, never making direct contact, but ensuring she knew someone cared enough to notice her humanity. "We'll see, Tyler," Marky replied, gathering his cleaning supplies. "But remember what I told you about respecting people's privacy. Sometimes people need space more than they need help." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. As they made their way through the quiet hallways of Chen Technologies, Tyler chattering about his upcoming field trip to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Marky couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be different somehow. Maybe it was the way the morning light filtered through the tall windows differently, or maybe it was just his imagination, but something in the air felt charged with possibility. They reached the main lobby just as the sun began painting the glass walls with warm golden streaks. Through the entrance doors, Marky could see the woman's alcove was empty, her blanket neatly folded. She was usually gone by 6:30, disappearing into the city before the first wave of employees arrived. Marky wondered where she spent her days, what her story was, how someone so young had ended up living on the streets. Tyler pressed his face against the glass doors, scanning the sidewalk with the focused intensity only children possessed. "There she is, Dad," he whispered, pointing across the street where the woman sat on a bus bench, staring directly up at the Chen Technologies logo emblazoned on the glass facade. Even from 40 floors up, something about her posture, the way she held her shoulders, seemed familiar in a way that made Jessica's chest tighten with impossible hope. "Linda, do you have those binoculars from the team building retreat?" Jessica asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the racing of her heart. "The ones from the wilderness survival exercise. I think they're in the supply closet. Why do you need them?" Jessica didn't answer, already moving toward the closet. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the focus, bringing the woman on the bench into sharp detail. Brown hair that had once been golden blonde, hollow cheeks that had once been round with childhood softness, but the eyes were the same. Those distinctive green eyes that had looked up at Jessica with complete trust when she was barely 7 years old, asking if they would really stay together in their new foster home. The binoculars slipped from Jessica's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the polished floor. Linda jumped up in concern as Jessica gripped the edge of her desk, the color draining from her face completely. "Jessica, what's wrong? Should I call someone?" "That woman," Jessica whispered, pointing toward the window with a trembling hand. "On the bench. It's Amy. It's my sister." Linda moved to the window, squinting down at the street. She'd worked for Jessica for 3 years and knew the story of the missing sister, knew how Jessica had hired private investigators and donated thousands to missing persons organizations, knew how every Christmas and birthday was marked by a hollow sadness that no amount of professional success could fill. "Are you sure? Maybe we should call security, have them go check." "No," Jessica said sharply, then caught herself. "I mean, not security. If it's really her and she sees uniforms, she might run. I need to go down there myself." But even as she said it, Jessica knew she couldn't. What would she say after 15 years of silence? How do you approach someone who might not even remember her name? Her mind raced through scenarios, each one ending with Amy disappearing back into whatever life she'd built without her older sister. Meanwhile, 4 floors below, in the maintenance office, Marky was reviewing his work schedule when Tyler tugged on his sleeve with unusual urgency. "Dad, something's wrong with the lady." Marky looked up from his clipboard to see Tyler pressed against the small window that offered a view of the street. Following his son's gaze, Marky saw the woman from the bench was now standing, pacing back and forth in front of the building with agitated movements. Her hands were clenched at her sides, and even from this distance, her distress was obvious. "Stay here, Tyler," Marky said, grabbing his radio and keys. "I'm going to check on her." "Can I come with you? Maybe she needs a friend." Marky paused at the door, looking at his son's earnest face. Tyler had inherited his mother's compassionate heart, along with her stubbornness, and Marky had learned that sometimes his 7-year-old's instincts about people were better than his own. "Okay, but you stay close to me, and if I tell you to step back, you listen immediately. Deal?" "Deal!" They made their way through the lobby, Marky nodding to the security guard who waved them through without question. Outside, the early morning air was crisp with the promise of spring, but the woman seemed oblivious to the weather. Up close, Marky could see she was younger than he had initially thought, probably in her mid-20s, with the kind of chronic stress and insufficient sleep that came from bone-deep exhaustion. She was muttering to herself, words too quiet to understand, her eyes fixed on the building's upper floors as if she could see through the glass and steel to something specific inside. "Excuse me," Marky said gently, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm Marky. I work in the building. Are you okay? You seem upset about something."
The woman spun around, her green eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something that looked almost like recognition. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to determine whether he was safe or threat. Tyler stepped slightly forward, offering one of the granola bars from his backpack. "My dad leaves food for you sometimes," he said with the matter-of-fact honesty that children possessed. "Are you hungry? This one's chocolate chip, and it's really good." Something in the woman's expression softened at Tyler's guileless offer. She accepted the granola bar with hands that shook slightly, not from cold, but from some deeper tremor that Marky recognized from his own difficult years. "Thank you," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. "Both of you. I'm Amy." "Amy," Marky repeated, filing the name away. "I'm glad to finally meet you properly. Tyler here has been worried about you." Amy looked down at Tyler with something approaching a smile. "Worried about me? That's very kind, but you don't even know me." "Dad says you don't have to know someone to care about them," Tyler replied seriously. "He says everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're having a hard time." Amy's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "Your dad sounds like a wise man." "He is," Tyler agreed without hesitation. "Are you having a hard time?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Amy off guard. She looked from Tyler to Marky, as if trying to decide how much truth she could handle sharing. "I used to live here," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the city around them. "A long time ago. I had family here, but things got complicated, and I ended up leaving. Now I'm back, but I'm not sure they'd want to see me." Marky felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "The building," he said softly. "You've been watching the building specifically, haven't you? Someone inside?" Amy nodded, fresh tears threatening to spill. "My sister. She works here, I think. I've been trying to work up the courage to go inside for 2 weeks, but what if she doesn't want to see me? What if she's moved on with her life and doesn't want reminders of the past?" "What's your sister's name?" Tyler asked with the innocent directness that adults had learned to suppress. "Jessica," Amy whispered. "Jessica Chen." Marky felt his eyebrows rise involuntarily. Everyone in the building knew Jessica Chen, the young CEO whose success story was legendary among the staff. She was known for being demanding but fair, brilliant but approachable, successful but somehow still searching for something that all her achievements couldn't provide. "Amy," Marky said carefully, "what's your last name?" "Chen," she replied, then quickly added, "Well, it was. I don't know what it is anymore. It's complicated." Above them, 40 floors up, Jessica was pacing her office like a caged animal, checking the window every few minutes to make sure Amy hadn't disappeared again. Linda had canceled her morning meetings without explanation and was researching every resource the company had for crisis intervention and family counseling. "She's talking to someone," Jessica reported during one of her window checks. "The maintenance worker and a little boy. They don't look like they're threatening her, but I can't tell what's happening from up here." "Jessica, you need to go down there," Linda said firmly. "You've been looking for her for 15 years. She's right outside your building. This isn't coincidence. This is opportunity." "But what if she runs? What if seeing me makes everything worse? What if she's not ready?" Linda stood up and moved to Jessica's side, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "What if she's been looking for you too? What if she's just as scared as you are? What if you're both letting fear keep you from the thing you want most?" On the street below, Amy was explaining to Marky and Tyler how she'd aged out of foster care at 18, how she'd struggled with addiction and homelessness, how she'd finally gotten clean 6 months ago and decided to come back to Denver to find the sister who had been her whole world until the system separated them. "I used to have a different last name," Amy was saying. "When we were little, before the foster homes, before everything got complicated. But Jessica and we promised we'd always be sisters no matter what. I just don't know if she remembers that promise." Tyler looked up at his father with the expression he got when he was working through a particularly complex problem. "Dad, if her sister works in your building, couldn't you help them find each other? Like when you helped me find my lost toy at the playground?" Marky smiled at his son's simple logic. "It's a little more complicated than that, buddy, but you're right. Sometimes people need help finding what they've lost. He looked at Amy, who was watching this exchange with growing hope in her eyes. "Amy, if you want, I could try to get a message to your sister. Let her know you're here. Let her know you want to see her. No pressure, no surprises, just information so you can both decide what happens next." Amy's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "You would do that? For someone you don't even know?" "Tyler's right about one thing," Marky said gently. "Sometimes helping others is the most important thing we can do. Besides, I have a feeling your sister has been looking for you just as hard as you've been looking for her." What none of them knew was that Jessica had finally made her decision. She was in the elevator, descending toward the lobby, her heart pounding with 15 years of accumulated hope and terror. In 2 minutes, the reunion that had existed only in dreams was about to become reality, and nothing would ever be the same for any of them. The elevator seemed to move in slow motion as Jessica descended toward the lobby, each floor marker lighting up like a countdown to the most important moment of her life. Her reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman who looked nothing like the confident CEO who had walked into the office that morning. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled from running her hands through it, her makeup smudged from tears she hadn't realized she'd shed, and her hands trembled as she gripped the rail for support. When the doors finally opened with a soft chime, Jessica stepped into the lobby on unsteady legs. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see Marky, Tyler, and Amy still standing on the sidewalk, their conversation appearing intense but not confrontational. Amy was gesturing toward the building while Marky nodded thoughtfully, and Tyler was offering what looked like another snack from his seemingly endless supply. Her security guard, Marcus Williams, looked up from his desk with surprise. "Miss Chen, is everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of his words wasn't lost on her. In a way, she had seen a ghost, the ghost of her past, her family, her heart that had been frozen for 15 years. "Marcus, I need to go outside for a moment. If anyone asks, I'm in an important meeting and shouldn't be disturbed." Marcus had worked security for Chen Technologies since its early days and had developed a protective instinct toward the young CEO who worked harder than anyone should have to. Something in her voice told him this wasn't about business. "Of course, Miss Chen. Take all the time you need." Jessica pushed through the revolving door and stepped onto the sidewalk, the morning air hitting her face like a splash of cold water. She was maybe 30 feet away from Amy, close enough to see the details that confirmed beyond any doubt that this was her sister. The small scar above Amy's left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike at age 6, the way she twisted a strand of hair around her finger when she was nervous, a habit that drove their foster mothers crazy, the slight tilt of her head when she listened intently to someone speaking. But Jessica's legs wouldn't carry her any closer. 15 years of wondering and searching and dreaming, and now that the moment was here, she was paralyzed by fear. What if Amy rejected her? What if Amy blamed her for not trying harder to keep them together? What if Amy was only here because she needed money or help, not because she wanted her sister back? Tyler was the first to notice her standing there. With the uninhibited curiosity of childhood, he tugged on Amy's sleeve and pointed in Jessica's direction. "Is that her? Is that your sister?" Amy turned slowly, following Tyler's gesture, and the world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. For a moment that felt like eternity, the two sisters stared at each other across 30 feet of sidewalk and 15 years of separation. Amy's hand flew to her throat, and she could see her lips form the word, Jessie, the childhood nickname that no one had called her in decades. Marky, sensing the gravity of the moment, gently placed his hands on Tyler's shoulders and guided him a few steps back, giving the sisters space while remaining close enough to provide support if needed. His own heart was racing as he witnessed what was clearly a life-changing reunion in the making. Amy took one tentative step forward, then another, her eyes never leaving Jessica's face. Jessica found her feet finally cooperating and began walking toward her sister, slowly at first, then with increasing speed until they were standing just arm's length apart. "Jessie!" Amy's voice was barely a whisper, thick with tears and hope and disbelief. "Amy!" Jessica breathed, reaching out with shaking hands to touch her sister's face, needing physical confirmation that this wasn't another cruel dream. "Oh my God, Amy, it's really you!" They collapsed into each other's arms with 15 years of grief and longing and love pouring out in broken sobs and hugs.
Whispered apologies and promises. Jessica buried her face in Amy's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent that somehow persisted underneath the harsh realities of life on the streets. Amy clung to her sister like a lifeline, her body shaking with the release of carrying such a heavy burden of separation alone. "I looked for you, Jessica whispered through her tears. "I never stopped looking. I hired investigators. I put your picture on missing persons websites. I donated to homeless shelters, hoping someone would recognize you. I never gave up." "I know," Amy replied, her voice muffled against Jessica's shoulder. "I heard about Chen Technologies, about what you built. I was so proud of you, but I was also terrified. Look at what you've become, and look at what I am. I didn't think you'd want to see me like this." Jessica pulled back just enough to look into her sister's eyes, her hands framing Amy's face with infinite tenderness. "You're my sister. You're my family. Nothing else matters. Nothing." From a respectful distance, Marky watched this reunion with Tyler pressed against his side, both of them understanding they were witnessing something sacred. Tyler's eyes were wide with wonder at the raw emotion playing out before them, while Marky felt his own eyes burning with sympathetic tears. He'd lost his own family when his wife left, and seeing these sisters find each other after so long struck something deep in his chest. "Dad," Tyler whispered, "why are they crying if they're happy?" "Sometimes people cry when they're so happy it hurts, buddy," Marky whispered back. "Sometimes feelings are too big for just smiling." The reunion on the sidewalk had not gone unnoticed inside the building. Several employees had gathered near the lobby windows, curious about what had their usually composed CEO so emotional. Linda had come down from the 40th floor and was standing beside Marcus at the security desk, both of them watching through the glass with protective concern. "Should we give them some privacy?" Linda asked, though she couldn't bring herself to look away from the sisters who were now talking rapidly, their hands gesturing as they tried to compress 15 years of separation into sentences. "In a minute," Marcus replied. "Let me make sure Miss Chen is safe first. That woman looks like she's been living rough, and I don't know her story yet." But even as he said it, Marcus could see there was nothing threatening about the reunion happening outside his building. Whatever the story was, it was clearly one of love found rather than danger discovered. Outside, Jessica was learning the broad strokes of Amy's journey through the foster system and beyond, how she'd been placed in 3 different homes after they were separated, how she'd aged out at 18 with no support system, how she'd struggled with addiction and homelessness for years before finally getting clean. Amy was learning about Jessica's rise in the tech industry, about the loneliness of success without family, about the fortune she'd built while never being able to buy the one thing she wanted most. "I have an apartment," Jessica said urgently, gripping Amy's hands as if she might disappear again. "It's huge and empty and I hate it, but it could be our apartment. You could stay with me while you get back on your feet. We could be a family again." Amy's face crumpled with fresh tears. "Jessie, I can't just move in with you. Look at me. I don't have anything. I haven't had a real job in years. I don't even have proper clothes for your world. You're this successful businesswoman, and I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," Jessica said fiercely. "You're my sister. You're the person I've missed every single day for 15 years. You're the most important person in my world, and you always have been." Marky, seeing that the conversation was becoming more private and potentially overwhelming for Amy, stepped forward gently. "Excuse me, ladies, I don't want to interrupt, but maybe this conversation might be more comfortable somewhere with a little more privacy? There's a coffee shop around the corner that's usually quiet this time of morning." Jessica looked at him with gratitude, suddenly remembering that this kind maintenance worker had been the bridge that made this reunion possible. "That's a wonderful idea. Amy, would you like to get some coffee? We have so much to talk about." Amy nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She turned to Tyler, who had been watching everything with fascination. "Thank you for the granola bars, Tyler, and thank you for caring about a stranger." Tyler beamed up at her. "You're not a stranger anymore. You're Jessica's sister, which means you're kind of like family to us too, right, Dad?" Marky felt his cheeks warm slightly at his son's assumption, but he nodded. "That's right, buddy. Sometimes family is the people who care about each other, not just the people who share the same last name. As the group began walking toward the coffee shop, Jessica fell into step beside Marky. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "If you hadn't been kind to Amy, if you hadn't been there when I was too scared to come down myself, this might never have happened." "I didn't do anything special," Marky replied, though he was touched by her gratitude. "I just treated another person with basic human decency. Tyler deserves the credit for making her feel welcome." "Still," Jessica insisted, "you gave my sister dignity when she needed it most. That's not nothing. That's everything." The coffee shop, Brew and Books, was indeed quiet, with only a few early morning customers scattered among the comfortable chairs and book-lined walls. Jessica ordered for all of them, insisting on pastries and sandwiches when she noticed how thin Amy had become. As they settled around a corner table, the awkwardness of 15 years began to surface. What do you say to someone you love more than life itself, but haven't spoken to since you were both children? How do you bridge the gap between the sister who had become a CEO and the sister who had become homeless? How do you rebuild trust that was broken not by choice, but by circumstances neither of them could control? The conversation started in fits and starts, punctuated by long silences and sudden bursts of shared memories. Amy remembered the secret language they'd developed in their first foster home, a series of hand signals that let them communicate when they weren't supposed to be talking. Jessica remembered the way Amy used to sing her to sleep when the nightmares came, her voice soft and soothing in the darkness of unfamiliar bedrooms. But the more they talked, the more the differences in their experiences became apparent. Amy had been placed with families who valued education and achievement, who had pushed her toward success even when she'd felt lost and alone. Amy had been placed with families who saw foster children as burdens or paychecks, who had provided the basics of survival but little emotional support. "I wanted to find you so many times," Amy confessed, tears flowing freely now that the dam had broken. "But I was ashamed. I was addicted. I was homeless. I was everything that would have disappointed you. I thought you'd be better off without me dragging you down." "You could never drag me down," Jessica replied, reaching across the table to take Amy's hands. "Don't you understand? Nothing I achieved mattered because you weren't there to share it with me. I would have given up everything to have you back." Tyler, who had been quietly coloring in a book that the coffee shop provided for young customers, looked up at the sisters with the wisdom that sometimes emerged from childhood innocence. "If you both wanted to find each other, and you both love each other, then why did you stay apart for so long?" It was Amy who answered, her voice gentle as she addressed the little boy who had shown her such kindness. "Sometimes, Tyler, people make mistakes because they're scared. I was scared your friend Jessica wouldn't love me anymore if she saw how much trouble I was in." "But that's silly," Tyler replied matter-of-factly. "My dad loves me even when I'm in trouble. That's what family does." The simple truth of a child's perspective hit both sisters with unexpected force. They had spent 15 years assuming the worst about each other's feelings, when in reality, both had been carrying the same pain, the same love, the same desperate hope for reunion. Jessica made a decision that would change both their lives. "Amy, I meant what I said about the apartment. I know it's a big adjustment, and I know there are things we need to work through, but I want you to come home with me. Today. Right now. We've lost enough time." Amy's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different somehow, lighter, filled with possibility instead of despair. "Are you sure? I don't want to disrupt your life. You've worked so hard for what you have." "What I have is meaningless without you," Jessica said simply. "Please, Amy, let me take care of you the way I should have been doing all along." But even as Amy nodded through her tears, accepting her sister's offer, neither of them could anticipate the challenges that lay ahead. Bringing someone who had been living on the streets into a world of corporate success would require adjustments neither sister was fully prepared for. The road to rebuilding their relationship would be filled with misunderstandings, setbacks, and moments when the gulf between their experiences seemed insurmountable. And looming in the background was a secret that Amy carried, a truth about their family that she had discovered during her years in the system, a truth that would ultimately surface at the most unexpected moment and test the strength of their newly rekindled bond in ways none of them could imagine. 6 months had passed since that life-changing morning outside Chen Technologies, and the changes in everyone's lives were remarkable. Amy had moved into Jessica's penthouse apartment, a sprawling space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. What had once been a sterile showcase of success had transformed into a real home, filled with laughter, shared meals, and the comfortable chaos that comes with family. Amy had enrolled in community college, working toward a degree in social work with a focus on helping homeless youth. Her experiences on the streets had given her insights that textbooks couldn't teach, and she was discovering a passion for advocacy work. Jessica had created a position for her at Chen Technologies, heading up the company's new community outreach program, an initiative that provided technology training and job placement services for people transitioning out of homelessness. Marky had become a regular fixture in their lives, invited to Sunday dinners that stretched long into the evening, with Tyler and Amy often conspiring on elaborate dessert creations that left the kitchen looking like a flower bomb had exploded. The friendship that had begun with simple kindness had deepened into something none of them had expected, but all of them treasured. Tyler had appointed himself Amy's unofficial life coach, providing commentary on everything from her college coursework to her growing confidence in professional settings. "You're getting really good at talking to people," he would announce with the proud authority of a 7-year-old who took credit for her progress. Amy would ruffle his hair and remind him that some of her best lessons came from watching how he treated everyone with equal kindness and curiosity. But success wasn't without its complications. Amy struggled with what she called imposter syndrome, feeling out of place in Jessica's world of board meetings and business lunches. There were nights when she would wake up in a panic, momentarily forgetting where she was, her body still conditioned to the hypervigilance required for survival on the streets. Jessica, meanwhile, was learning that love couldn't solve everything overnight, that healing from trauma was a process that required patience and professional support. The breakthrough moment came during a particularly challenging week in November. Amy had been accepted into a competitive internship program with the Denver Department of Human Services, but she was terrified of the interview process. Years of feeling invisible had left her uncertain about her ability to advocate for herself in professional settings. "I don't know if I can do this, Jessie," Amy confessed over dinner one evening, pushing her food around her plate without eating. "What if they ask about the gap in my resume? What if they want references from previous employers? What if they Google me and find out about my arrest record?" Jessica reached across the table and squeezed her sister's hand. "Amy, your experiences don't disqualify you from this work. They make you uniquely qualified for it. You understand the system from the inside in ways that most social workers never will." "But what if they don't see it that way? What if they just see someone who made bad choices and can't be trusted with important work?" It was Marky who provided the perspective that changed everything. He had been quietly listening to the conversation while helping Tyler with his homework at the kitchen counter, but now he turned to face Amy directly. "Amy, can I tell you something? When I was injured and had to leave firefighting, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd failed at the one thing I was good at, and I spent months feeling sorry for myself. But Tyler helped me realize that my experience as a firefighter didn't end when I stopped fighting fires. It informed everything I did afterward. My understanding of crisis management, my ability to stay calm under pressure, my knowledge of how people react when their world is falling apart, all of that made me better at helping kids who were dealing with their own emergencies." He moved closer to Amy, his expression earnest and encouraging. "Amy, your experiences on the streets, your journey through addiction and recovery, your understanding of what it feels like to be invisible in society, those aren't failures you need to hide from. They're qualifications that make you irreplaceable."
Tyler looked up from his math worksheet with the sudden inspiration that children sometimes possessed. Amy, you should tell them about how you helped that lady at the shelter last week. Remember? The one who was scared to apply for the job because she didn't have nice clothes? You gave her your interview outfit and taught her how to fill out the application. Amy's eyes filled with tears at the memory. She had indeed encountered a woman at the volunteer work she had been doing at a local shelter. Someone newer to homelessness who was overwhelmed by the bureaucracy involved in accessing services. Amy had spent hours walking her through the process, sharing practical knowledge that could only come from lived experience. "See," Jessica said softly, "you're already doing the work, Amy. The internship is just making it official." The interview took place on a cold December morning at the Department of Human Services downtown office. Amy had spent weeks preparing, practicing answers to potential questions with Jessica and researching the department's programs and policies. She wore a professional navy suit that Jessica had bought for her, but she carried herself with confidence that was entirely her own. Marky had offered to drive her to the interview, understanding that having support nearby could make the difference between success and panic.
Tyler said seriously as they sat in the car outside the government building. "If they ask you hard questions, just tell them the truth. Dad says the truth is always the right answer, even when it's scary." Amy kissed the top of his head, drawing strength from his unshakable faith in her abilities. "Thank you, Tyler, for everything." The interview lasted 2 hours, and Amy emerged feeling cautiously optimistic. The pair had been impressed by her academic performance at community college. But more importantly, they had been moved by her understanding of the challenges faced by their client population. When they asked about her background, Amy had taken Tyler's advice and told the truth, explaining how her experiences had given her insights that would benefit the people she wanted to serve. 3 days later, the call came. Amy had been selected for the internship, with the possibility of a full-time position upon completion of her degree. Jessica was in a board meeting when Amy called with the news, and she excused herself immediately, not caring what her executives thought of her priorities. "You did it," Jessica said, tears of pride streaming down her face as they celebrated in Amy's bedroom, surrounded by textbooks and the vision board she'd created of her goals. "I'm so proud of you, but more than that, I'm proud to be your sister." Amy hugged her tightly, both of them understanding that this moment represented more than just the career opportunity. It was proof that Amy had reclaimed her life, that she was no longer defined by her lowest moments, that she had found her purpose in helping others navigate the systems that had once seemed insurmountable to her. That evening, Marky and Tyler arrived for a celebratory dinner, Tyler carrying a homemade card congratulating Amy on her super important new job. As they gathered around the dinner table, sharing stories and laughter, Amy looked around at these people who had become her chosen family and felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since childhood. But what none of them knew was that Amy's new position would soon bring her into contact with records from the foster care system. Records that would reveal information about her and Jessica's origins that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their family history. The secret that Amy had been carrying was about to become impossible to keep, and the revelation would test the strength of all their relationships in ways they never could have anticipated. As they sat around that dinner table, celebrating Amy's triumph, none of them could imagine that in just a few months they would be facing the most difficult conversation of their lives, one that would ultimately bring them closer together, but only after threatening to tear apart the family they had so carefully rebuilt. The morning of Amy's wedding arrived with perfect Colorado sunshine streaming through the windows of the bridal suite at Pine Ridge Reception Hall. Jessica stood behind her sister, carefully fastening the delicate pearl buttons on the vintage lace dress they'd found together at a boutique in downtown Denver. In the mirror's reflection, both sisters looked radiant, but there was a nervous energy in the room that had nothing to do with typical wedding jitters. "Jessie," Amy said quietly, watching her sister's hands tremble slightly as she worked with the buttons, "are you sure you're okay with this? With David and me revealing everything today?" Jessica met her sister's eyes in the mirror, her expression filled with love and determination. "Amy, this is your wedding day.
It's about celebrating your love and your new beginning. If you and David want to share your truth with everyone, then I'll be right there beside you, just like always. 3 months earlier, Amy's work at the Department of Human Services had led her to discover documents that revealed the truth about their separation 15 years ago. They weren't biological sisters at all. Jessica had been adopted by the Chen family when she was 3, after her birth parents died in a car accident. Amy had entered the foster system around the same time from a completely different situation. They had been placed in the same emergency foster home where they'd formed such a strong bond that everyone assumed they were biological siblings. When the placements became permanent, the paperwork had never been corrected, and they'd grown up believing they shared blood when what they actually shared was something deeper, a chosen connection that had survived years of separation. The discovery had initially shaken both sisters. Amy had worried that Jessica would feel deceived, that their reunion had been based on a lie. Jessica had worried that Amy would feel their bond was somehow less meaningful without biological ties. But after long conversations, many tears, and several sessions with a family counselor, they'd realized that their love for each other was exactly the same regardless of genetics. David, Amy's fiancé and fellow social worker, whom she'd met during her internship, had suggested they use their wedding as an opportunity to celebrate chosen family in all its forms. "What better day to tell the world that family isn't just about blood," he'd said. "It's about people who choose to love each other unconditionally." Now, as Amy prepared to walk down the aisle, she felt peaceful about their decision. The wedding guests included an eclectic mix of people who had become family through choice rather than birth. Marky would be walking Amy down the aisle, a role she'd asked him to fill because he'd been the bridge that brought her back to Jessica. Tyler, now 8 and taking his role as ring bearer very seriously, had spent the morning making sure everyone knew where to sit and when to stand. The ceremony took place in the garden behind the reception hall, with mountain peaks visible in the distance and aspen trees creating a natural cathedral. As Amy walked toward David, her eyes found Jessica in the front row, tears of joy streaming down her face. Marky squeezed Amy's arm gently before placing her hand in David's, his own eyes bright with emotion. The officiant, a friend of David's from graduate school, spoke about the various forms that love takes and how the strongest families are often the ones we choose for ourselves. When it came time for Amy and David to share their personal vows, Amy turned to face the gathered guests. "David and I wanted to share something with all of you today," she began, her voice clear and confident. "For most of my life, I believed that Jessica and I were biological sisters. We discovered recently that we're not related by blood at all. We're something even more special. We're sisters by choice, by love, by the decision we made as children to be each other's family no matter what." She turned to Jessica, who was openly weeping now. "Jessie, you are my sister in every way that matters. You chose to love me when we were both scared and alone, and you chose to love me again when I came back into your life broken and lost. Thank you for showing me that family isn't about where you come from, it's about who you choose to stand with." The audience was completely silent, many wiping away their own tears. Tyler, unable to contain himself, called out loudly, "That's the best kind of family," causing everyone to laugh and breaking the emotional tension. David took Amy's hands and spoke his vows about choosing love every day, about building a family based on compassion and commitment rather than obligation. When they kissed, sealing their marriage, the celebration that followed was filled with the kind of joy that comes from people who understand what it means to find your tribe. As the evening wound down, Amy found herself standing with Jessica, Marky, and Tyler on the deck overlooking the mountains. The fairy lights strung overhead twinkled like stars, and the sound of laughter drifted from inside where guests were still dancing. "We did it," Amy said softly, leaning against Jessica's shoulder. "No," Jessica replied, wrapping her arm around her sister. "We found our way forward to something even better." Tyler, drowsy from the long day but still clutching a piece of wedding cake, looked up at the 3 adults who had become his extended family. "Are we all going to live together now?" The adults exchanged glances, and Marky cleared his throat. Well, Tyler, Amy and David are going to live in their own house, but we'll still see them all the time for Sunday dinners and holidays and whenever we want to. Good, Tyler said with satisfaction, because I like our family just the way it is.
There together, looking out at the Colorado mountains under a canopy of stars, each of them understood that they had found something precious and rare. They had created a family based not on blood or law or convention, but on the simple decision to love each other unconditionally. And in that choice, they had discovered that the strongest bonds are often the ones we forge ourselves, one day at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one moment of choosing love over fear. Amy squeezed Jessica's hand and whispered, "Home." And it was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.